Hi, this is Ty Hyderali. We concentrate in employment law in New York and New Jersey. So early this year, New York State legalized utilization of marijuana under a law called the New York State Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. And that left the question, well, what does that mean with regard to drug testing in the workplace? Is it legal? Can it happen? And there was a lot of confusion over this issue, both for employers and employees. So the New York State Department of Labor issued some guidelines to clarify this issue and answer the question. What can employers do and when can they do it? And the guidelines are called the Adult Cannabis Use in the Workplace Guidelines. And so there's specifically 5 different criteria that employers can look at. Number one, if the employer is required by state or federal law to do drug testing, they can do it. For example, employers who are engaged in transportation and are required to drug test. Number two, there's a federal law that requires drug testing, kind of similar to the first criteria. Number three, if the employer may lose a federal contract if they don't drug test, they can do it. Number four, and this is where it gets a little hazy, so to speak. If the employee demonstrates specific actions in the workplace that reduces or lessens the performance of their work, the employer can require a drug test. And the next example of where the employer can require a drug test is similar to kind of this, the one I just articulated. If the employee engages in specific conduct that demonstrates that there's an impairment that affects safety in the workplace, employer can drug test the person. And the employer has to be able to articulate some specific reason that gave rise to this fourth and fifth reason where the employee is doing something that manifests a need to drug test. They can't just say, well, we kind of thought he or she was under the influence of drugs. They have to articulate what the employee was doing that demonstrated lessened performance or a safety risk. And the stereotypical things such as smell or red eyes cannot be the basis of why the employer is requiring a drug test. A couple other things. The regulations, of course, allow for drug testing, but they say basically specifically that an employer can prohibit drug usage while at work, but they can't prohibit it while the employee is off the clock. And what does that mean with regard to remote work? Well, kind of the same guidelines are in place. If the employee is working remotely and demonstrates some action which shows reduced performance while working remotely and they're on the clock, the employer can require drug testing. And same for the other 5 exceptions. So remote work doesn't really affect things, but the guidelines do clarify employer cannot prohibit an employee from having marijuana in the workplace, at home, and cannot prohibit employees from taking marijuana as long as it's not during work hours. This is Ty Hyderali. Be safe and be well.